Hello and welcome to lesson 72 of the Learning Guitar series. In this particular lesson, we're going to look into the fourth degree of the Melodic Minor Modes, and in the specific, it's called the Lydian Dominant mode. As the name implies, again, the starting point, as it was with Lydian Augmented or Lydian Sharp 5 that we studied in the last lesson, we're kind of starting from a Lydian scale. But in this case, we're going to be flattening the major 7 into a dominant 7, and we will be applying this particular scale to dominant 7 chords. Anyway, before we go ahead with these studies, I would like to thank the people, the patrons who are supporting this project on Patreon, and the people subscribed to the YouTube channels. And so thank you for your support. If you have not done yet so, you might consider subscribing to the Patreon page, as this will allow you access to all the PDFs, backing tracks, you name it, all the stuff that we discussed by now over 72 lessons. There is a shop also in there where I started to put, older material in organized manner, and that's you don't have to be a Patreon supporter to access that. Anyway, let's talk about Lydian Dominant. First of all, what I have here is a melodic minor scale, D melodic minor in this case, and basically what we're looking at is root note, 2nd, flat 3, 4, 5th, 6th, and major 7, because those are the intervals of a melodic minor. When it comes to the 4th degree, which is what we're studying today, what we're looking at, I'm going to literally rewrite the scale, but this time I'm going to start from G and go all the way around and come back to G. So hence what we have, G, A, B, C sharp, D, E, and F. Given the different starting point, if I look at what intervals I'm generating from, if I consider this the root note, well, from G to A, the interval is a 2nd. From G to B, the interval is a major 3rd. From G to C sharp, the interval is a sharp 4. From G to D, the interval is a 5th. From G to E, the interval is a 6, and from G to F is a flat 7. And simply put, these are the intervals of a Lydian dominant scale. Simply, if you remember the intervals of Lydian would have been 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, major 7. So as you can see, literally one note is changing. This. And don't worry if, you don't manage to retain straight away this kind of idea. It's contained anyway in the PDF that comes with this lesson. And I'll show it to you in a second. So, the Lydian Dominant mode is the 4th mode of the melodic minor and presents the following intervals, and I just explained to you where that's coming from. Already the name implies how it's basically Lydian scale, the 4th degree of the major modes, but with a flattened 7. As such, it can be applied to dominant 7 chords, such as 7 sharp 11, 9 sharp 11, 13 sharp 11, and as we will see in a second, 7 flat 5, 9 flat 5, and 13 flat 5. Now, please don't forget that sharp 4 and flat 5 are the same, basically the same note. Same thing, like, sharp 11 and flat 5 is the same note, just an octave higher. Now, academically speaking, the correct definition would be a sharp 4 and a sharp 11. So the chord itself, if you want to really tell, say, the other musicians, or you're writing a piece, and you kind of want to specify that you want a Lydian dominant sound, which, by the way, let me actually, let me play it to you. Here is a dominant 7 chord. This is G7. And that's a Lydian dominant scale. So in a certain way, it's a bit deceiving in a way to think of it as a starting point to think of it as Lydian, and then with the flat 7, just because Lydian is a scale that we apply to major chords because of the major 7, while Lydian dominant we apply to dominant 7 chords. So in a way, if we really want to spot the differences in terms of sound, we should kind of compare it to Mixolydian, okay? And because Mixolydian, when it comes to the major modes, is the scale that we would apply to dominant 7 chord, and Mixolydian goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. And again, the difference is literally one note, right? We don't have the 4, but we'd rather have a sharp 4. So let me play you the difference. This is Mixolydian. Here is the 4th. And here instead is the 4th replaced by a sharp 4. Oops. So, as you can see, like, we have a slightly different sound that, to be honest, is one of my favorite in terms of kind of twisting a Mixolydian a little bit. So Lydian dominant can be a scale that can easily be used for that. Now, going back to the sharp 11 versus flat 5, or sharp 4 versus flat 5. Technically, so the chord that I want to play, for example, this chord, which is a dominant 7, with a sharp 11, which will be literally the chord that is screaming for a Lydian dominant melody. And the reason we would define it as a sharp 11 or a sharp 4 is because the 5th is still in the scale. We literally moved the 4th to a sharp 4, okay? And so if I say flat 5, it would maybe imply that I took the 5th and I flattened it, but actually the 5th is in the scale. There it is. But, you know, sometimes beside the academy, real life, brings something else. So it's not unusual, say, if you take the real book of jazz and you're playing a standard, from time to time, actually when it comes to dominant 7 chord, you might see on a page dominant 7 flat 5, So, beside academy, I'm somebody who actually plays a lot of gigs. So they both mean the same thing. Somehow, like if I see this, and you can find it written as dominant 7 flat 5, is still screaming for Lydian dominant. It doesn't necessarily mean, we're not playing the 5th at all, okay? Just so you know, I just throw it in there. I'm sure somebody will not agree with me, and, feel free, and put it in the comments, okay? Now, let's go back. Being a dominant 7 related mode, it can be used to create tension, which resolves into one chord in a typical 5 to 1 or 5 to -1. Okay. What that means, like, as we know, 5 to 1 tension resolution, very, very simple concept. So because this is a dominant chord, now I'm going to loop, say, G7 into C major. That's a 5 to 1 in the key of C. And we could do almost the same G7 into C minor, which would be a 5 to 1 minor. Let's do it with a major version. I'm going to loop it. So over the G7, I can use Lydian dominant. Here at G7. I'm sure it makes sense. But let's go back to the PDF. So in that context, you can replace Mixolydian and alters in terms of adding a sharp 4, and I already explained that. And bear in mind the difference between Mixolydian and Lydian Dominant is simply one note, which is basically the sharp 4. Here is a Mixolydian, by interval is the Lydian Dominant. An even more common use for it is over static dominant chords, which means 7 chords which don't resolve into a 1 chord. What does that mean? So far we've been used to dominant 7 chords which resolve. So a G7 that will go into C major or into C minor. Typical 5-to-1, and this, when I say G7 into C, I mean we are in the key of C. We could have been in the key of E flat, in which case the 5 chord would be B flat. Major and minor. But there are situations in which the dominant 7 chord is not actually resolving into 1 chord. Let me give you a couple examples. The most common I can think of is when you're playing the blues. Because when you're playing the blues, say if there's a blues in A, you have, I don't know, A, D, back to A, okay? This is literally the first 4 bars. The first chord is A, 7 obviously, and it's moving to a D7. And if you think in terms of interval, D is a 5th away, is a 4th away from A. So that is some sort of 5-to-1, where A is the 5 and D7 is the 1. So fair enough. But straight after that, D7 is going back to A. Now, from a perspective of D, the 1 chord would be G major 7. That would be a 5-to-1, or D to G7, or D to G minor, but definitely not back to A, okay? So in that sense, all these blues chords are kind of static. They don't necessarily used for attention resolution kind of approach. And this is really where Lydian Dominant comes alive. So I'm going to kind of loop the very first 4 bars without having to go through the entire 12 bars of the blues. But I will be using Lydian Dominant, actually even over the A chord, but at first just over the D7, so you can actually hear applied. And then when it's in A, I'll be back to Mixolydian, okay? Or maybe even A minor pentatonic, just to stay in the blues realm. Okay. Now Lydian Dominant were also over the A chord. I hope it makes sense. And, well, if something is unclear, you can always leave a comment on YouTube and I'll try and address it. And, of course, if you're a patron, you can always message me directly for that. As you can see, the moment you start using Lydian Dominant, you get I want to say a jazzier sound, but not necessarily. I mean, it's not extreme jazz or something. If anything, it might remind you a little bit more of say, Robin Ford or Larry Carlton, these kind of guys. which are still kind of rooted in the blues. Let's go back to the PDF. So take, for example, progression like F minor, B flat, C major. The B flat should resolve into E flat, instead it resolve into C major. Again, that's a different example, using a 2-5. We are in the key of E flat in this case, and chord number 2 in the key of E flat is F minor, and chord number 5 is B flat. And if it was a 2-5-1, this would resolve into E flat major. Instead, in this case, we are resolving into C major, so it's something like this. And again, we think of this B flat 7 as a static dominant 7 chord. Again, great territory for the Lydian Dominant. And this kind of progression, for example, like again, this one is, kind of very much present in jazz standards, but it doesn't have to be. So C major is going to be Ionian, obviously. F minor could be Dorian, and B flat is going to be a Lydian Dominant. No? So this is F minor arpeggio, G7, C major. That was something else. So, I hope it's clear so far where we're going with this. Let's look at further interesting things about it. Let's have a look at the modal arpeggio. So, for this, we can come back 1 second to this. And again, instead of looking at the scale as an horizontal thing, let's look at it as a vertical thing. So I have G, B. So I'm stacking interval of thirds as always. G, B, D, F. So from G to B, from B to D, from D to F, from F to A, from A to C sharp, from C sharp to E, and of course from E we're back to G. So again, this is just the vertical structure. This is the horizontal structure. It's the same note, but in this case now the intervals are going to spell 1, 3, D from a perspective of G is the 5th, then I have the flat 7, the 9, and here we go with the sharp 11, and E is a 13, okay? Now, looking at the vertical structure tells us what we can do in terms of chords, and also what we can do in terms of arpeggios. Of course, this part here, until here, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, we already studied it when we did the Mixolydian, so nothing new under the sun there. And again, if you think in terms of the modal arpeggio, until here is the same as Mixolydian, the only difference in note is here. And if I want to hear the sound of a modal arpeggio, say for example this is the root note, 3, 5, flat 7, okay, 9, sharp 11, 13, so you have this. That's the sound. So, and if I pitch it against the G bass, and of course, like the normal dominant 7 chord works. That's just 1, 3, 5, flat 7, or even with the 9. They all work, What is more interesting in a way, and we'll see it in the second, as we did in the last lesson, we're going to start looking at the possibility of creating slash chords, which might make our life a little bit easier. But in terms of chords, You can think of this as, dominant 7 flat 5, but you can add extra colors to it, obviously, if the fingerings allows. So like, for example, you can have a 9, especially if there is a bass player. Then we can do maybe, like, at times more interesting voicings like this. If I was to do this in A, I can use the A bass. Right. Let's have a look at what happens when we kind of break the arpeggio down in triads and extended triads. Because in that case, we can, once again, if possible, whenever we can use kind of the cage system to kind of exploit both our chordal playing and to certain extent also our melodic playing. So if we look at the case of G, GBD is obviously a G major triad. Nothing new under the sun there. B, D, and F. So if I use 3, 5, and flat 7, okay? The interval in between B and a D is a flat 3. And the interval in between the B and F, that's a flat 5. So we're looking at a B diminished, okay? I could play B diminished over G7 flat 5, and these are the intervals I'm kind of generating. D, F, and A. Now, the interval in between D and F is a flat 3, and the interval in between D and A is a fifth. So this is a D minor. Now, that's already kind of somehow more usable, because a D minor, it's arpeggio is probably something that you know better than diminished, but if you know diminished better, anything would do. But in this case, you are exploiting 5, flat 7, and 9. Next, F, A, and Z sharp. So this part here. F, the interval in between F and A is a major third. F and C sharp is augmented. So it's a sharp 5. So what we're looking at is an F augmented triad. And that's interesting because, again, like with diminished, you can use symmetrical sounds. So in the case of G, what it's suggesting is basically you have this, which obviously has the property of augmented. When we do, augmented, we look into it. Right? So you have this. Because augmented is a symmetrical scale in the same manner as diminished is a symmetrical scale. If we continue, now we have A, C sharp, and E. Now, from an A perspective, C sharp is a major third, and E is the fifth. So what we're looking at is A major triad. And this is interesting because it is literally only looking at the upper structure. So it's a bit like playing an A triad with a bass of G. So I have an A triad, I can do it here, with a bass of G. That's my G7 kind of root note, flat 7, 3, and 5, kind of the essential. Then if I create a progression which has basically G in the bass, and just alternate, or even a G triad, I have this kind of sound. So in a way, that triad here kind of gives me access directly to the upper structure. It's true that it's not highlighting necessarily the flat 7, and that's why I was putting this kind of sound before, just to establish the fact that we are in dominant. So the moment our ears establishes that, is fine if I put that as an upper stretcher. That upper stretcher is common with actual Lydian. So if I left it on its own, without never establishing a flat 7 there, now even Lydian would have worked. I hope it makes sense. This is a bit more advanced as harmony theory, but you know, we're at lesson 72 at some point. We'll get to this kind of stuff, but probably some of you already understand where I'm going with this. Let's see further if we have anything else interesting. Well, we have C sharp, E, and G. Again, that's so it will be sharp 11, 13, and a root note. C sharp, the interval to an E is a flat 3, and C sharp to a G is a flat 5, so you have another diminished. And then you have E, G, and B, so you have the 13, the root note, and the third here. And this is E minor, because the interval in between E and G is a flat 3, and E and B is a fifth. So now it's also like from a G perspective. I can use D minor, I can use E minor. If I use D minor, I'm getting this part. And if I'm using E minor, I'm getting 1, 3, and 13. And that can be interesting in terms of going back and forth in between the two. I mean, literally, we're looking at the D minor, triad, and E minor, right? And at that point, you know, it becomes maybe like relevant at some point when we do studies of triadic conversions. But in the last, even if we just stick to, you know, just to hear the sound of it. Again, the chord is this. This is the Lydian Dominant scale. If I play it in this area, that's D minor. And that can also be like an interesting solution to develop melodic ideas over a dominant 7, sharp 11 type of chord. Let's look, let's investigate further. And so these are basically triads as slash chords. So basically what in terms of chords, I mean, it comes by itself. I could have done, so basically you have a D minor with a bass of G, and then an E minor with a bass of G. This is an E minor triad. That's you should note this as, you know, D minor, right? That's E minor. This is, you know, like probably I can't reach it from there, but this is a bass of D, a bass of G. So you can have this. This is a G here, and that's a E minor triad. Now the only thing is like, the D minor triad obviously is giving me, as an effect, 5, flat 7, and 9 here. And the E minor triad is giving me the 13, the root note, and the third. And somehow I'm not highlighting the sharp 11, which is somehow the sound, you know. So in terms of using triads, you might find using, say, for example, an A triad as an arpeggio. Maybe D minor and A, so D minor is covering this part and A is covering this part. More fit for purpose, so in a way like a G triad going to an A triad in terms of sound, because the sharp 11 is what gives character to this particular scale. As I say, this is the note that we have in different, like the difference from mixolydian. So D minor is going to be also working in Mixolydian and E minor as much. A in particular instead, it doesn't, because A contains that sharp 11. So in terms of sound, again, let's just establish a dominant 7 chord. And then I'm going to go using, triads of G and A, right? And the same thing obviously applied with chords, like we said before. Now let's look at extended triads. So now we're looking at a group of 4 notes at a time, okay? And G, B, D, F, obviously, this is G7. Yeah. Now, B, D, F, A, if you remember from Mixolydian, you should already know this is half diminished, so the interval of B to D is a flat 3, this is a flat 5, and this is a flat 7. So this is B minor 7, flat 5. D, F, A, and C sharp. So now we go to a territory where the sharp 11 is present. The interval in between D and F is a flat 3. D and A is a 5. D and C sharp is a major 7. So this is your D minor 7. D minor major 7. F, A, C sharp, E. Interval in between F, so we have this part here. The interval in between F and A is a major 3. F and C sharp, this is an augmented 5th, and F and E, this is a major 7. So this is F major 7 with a sharp 5. Okay? So far it's kind of complicated. I mean, not necessarily complicated. It depends on how familiar you are with this type of arpeggio. You should be familiar with this type of arpeggio because it's located in the major mode. We studied a long time ago by now. And the minor major 7 is basically the first degree of, we studied those chords when we've done melodic minor. Anyway, let's keep digging. 9, sharp 11, 13, 1. So the interval in between A and C sharp is a major 3. A and E is a 5th, A and G is a flat 7. Okay, now this should make our life easier. It's an A7. And, okay, G7, A7. This is a bit easier to remember because if I'm playing G7 as a chord, say G7 flat 5, this is just a tone up. So it might be, like we have seen also for the Lydian Dominant in the last lesson. It might be kind of easier sometimes to remember certain things because they're close to each other. So if this is an A7 voicings, there'll be G in the bass, okay? And, I can bounce back and forth, and this is actually G. I can back and forth this kind of 2 voicings, or like I can think of it as, and then still with the bass of G. These are interesting sounds, and of course if I can do it as a chord, I can do it in the melody, as arpeggios, so I'm bouncing from, that's G7, that's A7, and depending what kind of G you are. Again, don't forget we're talking the cage system here most of the time, so like there is 5 shapes for everything. Let's see what kind of sounds it gives us. I'm just going to loop like a normal G so you can hear the changing in the melody. Now, bear in mind, your melodic ideas, they're not necessarily restricted as, okay, now I'm just going to play arpeggios, or now I'm just going to play scales. I'm forcing myself to stay within the boundaries. Okay, I'm just going to use that. And that's a good exercise. What I mean is, when you're playing, play, mix and match. Feel free. But when you're trying to interiorize a sound, you want to restrict yourself and say, okay, for 10 minutes, I'm just going to try and create musical ideas just using that. Because you're training your ears at the same time, and you're opening your mind to new ideas as opposed to, you playing what you already know. And they're great guide tones, obviously. Arpeggios are excellent guide tones, more than scales can ever be. So, like you can always, as I said, you can always mix and match. So I can have a progression simply that goes, let's do like, I don't know, G7 to A major. But when G7 happens, I'm basically going to play G7, A as triad, like I was just doing, and then resolving that somehow into A. And so he's going to, well, I don't know. I'm making this up. So, that's the kind of way I would exercise. I'm just putting some random chords together, kind of mapping out what is it I can try on them, and then try it. But the key is the limit. Give yourself some limits, And actually, as in the second thought, and at some point, I can literally go with a scale. So for G, I'll be using, Lydian Dominant, so I'll be practicing a bit of the scale. And for A major, well, Ionian or Lydian, why not? I can, major can call for Lydian too. Let's see what it sounds. That's A7 arpeggio. A major arpeggio. So let's look back now at whatever is left on the PDF here. So in terms of then status, okay, Lydian Dominant scales, and as you know by now, like the fingerings is still going to be the same as when you study melodic minor, but of course the placement on the neck is going to be different. So technically you don't have to study things new, you just have to study where they are, and of course the blue dots is going to tell you what the chords is, in typical cage system style. Here you have a dominant 7 flat 5 arpeggios. These are interesting. What I did is I removed the fifth. So this is something I haven't done before. So in a typical Mixolydian thing, you would have 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 1, 3, 5, flat 7. And that's great. In a way, by moving the 5 to a flat 5 or to a sharp 4, and keep it a flat 7, now we're going to a territory where you're kind of targeting the Lydian Dominant sound. So you have this kind of, and it might be, the only awkward thing about it, as you will see, is that you'll have kind of large stretches to get there if you're trying to do it in a cage system type of manner. Because you have 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7, 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7, and there is a flat 5 here, so in a way you could cross you could cross kind of cages, but just from a visual perspective, you might want to start from a cage system, because you'll get used to where all the intervals are. Because of course here is a flat 7, here is a flat 7. So I could even do it that way. Now you have that kind of sweep-friendly type of position, right? Anyway, have a look. First, have a look at as they are written, and then see if you can expand on them. You know, there is a lot of possibilities here. Last but not least, here you have the modal arpeggio. So 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, sharp 11, and 13, etc. across the neck of the guitar. And some example of chords, like I did in the previous lesson. You know, dominant, I didn't write every single dominant 7 chords I can think of, because there is no point with them, that over Lydian, you know, etc. I try to include a vast majority of these shapes will have the flat 7 and the sharp 11 in it, because that's really what kind of defines this particular mode. And so you have the shape of D, etc., shape of C. And again, you can kind of try and develop your chord voicings if you want, you know, like, for as long as you understand what defines the sound of this particular mode. And you know, that's pretty much it. You know, I mean, it's a lot of stuff. One last consideration. I mean, in this case, actually, G. If you think of G and the 4th degree of melodic minor modes, well, basically, G Lydian Dominant is the same notes as D melodic minor. Of course, when I look at it from a perspective of G, I get the intervals that we call Lydian Dominant, and if I use the D as a root note, I will get the intervals of D melodic minor. Fair enough. So what I'm saying is, you know, this is G Lydian Dominant. And if you ask me, oh, can you play me D melodic minor? It's the same notes. Now, in this contest, it might not be that relevant. You know, like, if I want to play Lydian Dominant, I'll think straight from, you know, what is the chord? G7, G Lydian Dominant. But this idea of bringing back things to their original key, so from G7 I'm going to D minor, D melodic minor, is something I just want to open your mind to at some point, because as you will see when we studied more advanced melodic minor studies over dominant 7 chords, this can come handy, the fact of actually thinking it in 2 different ways. Anyway, just throwing some stuff out there without explaining it too much yet. It's been a pleasure. I hope it made sense. If you have any questions, you know what to do. And yes, see if you can support the Patreon page or buy stuff from the shop on Patreon. You know, helps us support this entire project. It's been a pleasure. Until next time. Cheers. Bye.